Welcome everybody to the ordinary council meeting held in the Beaufort Chambers on the 17th of August 2021. As the meeting chair, I give my consent for this open council meeting to be streamed live, recorded and published online. Anyone who is invited to read out a question or a presentation will be recorded, and their voice, image and comments will form part of the live stream and recording. The chair and or the CEO have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. The stream will stop prior to the closed section of the meeting and will recommence for the conclusion of the meeting. The public is able to view this live stream via our website at www.pyrenees.vic.gov.au. Should technical issues prevent the continuation of the stream, a recording will be made available on our website. Opening prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask you to give your blessing to this council, direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the Pyrenees Shire. Amen. We acknowledge the people past and present of the Wadawurrung, Jar Jar Wurrung, Eastern Ma and Watchabollock tribes, whose land forms the Pyrenees Shire. We pay our respect to the customs, traditions and stewardship of the land by the elders and people of these tribes on whose land we meet today. I call for any apologies. None, thank you. Item 6, notice of disclosure of interest by councillors and officers.
I do have one, Mr Mayor, for part of item 13.1.1. Thank you. I'll just leave for the first part.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. Confirmation of the previous minutes. Have we had a chance to have a look at those? And if so, could I have someone move those meetings? Councillor Eason, seconded. Councillor Clark, all those in favour, thank you. Business arising. I noticed there's a response there to a question that was submitted by Ian Murdoch, and our CEO, Jim Nolan, has provided a written response and addressed those questions that were raised in a previous council meeting. So thank you for that, Jim. Any further business arising? Yes, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have an item that was put on the table at the last council meeting in relation to the Lansbury General Store. If we could, we need a motion to raise. Just bear with us, training. We have a motion in relation to the Lansbury General Store that was deferred at the last council meeting. I'd like to move a recommendation for us to deal with that matter, please. If I can get a seconder.
Second, Councillor Eason. Thank you. Do we have a recommendation for that?
It's in front of us.
Recommendation, yes, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, so Mr Mayor, just you can see the motion on the screen, and I apologise to the public who can't see it. It effectively says that council would provide the planning support required to make the store in Lansbury ready to open for trading as soon as practical. And this follows on from a visit by council staff, by councillors yesterday to the site, and we have an owner there who's ready to do some work to make this a viable business. And I think that's a logical thing for us to proceed with. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, in the meeting yesterday with Robbo, we found it very successful to actually go to site, have a look at what's on operation there and talk to staff as well as the owner. And I hope this recommendation gets things moving for him.
Thank you, councillor Easton. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? No. And I did attend there yesterday as well, and I quite agree that it was very worthwhile to actually not just to go and speak in person, but to actually view the store and look at the lay of the land to see what we're dealing with. It make that visual perspective makes it much easier, and it's good that we can progress this item because it's one that we have placed on the table previously. So. We have a recommendation there. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 9, public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to ask questions of council at ordinary council meetings. Members of the public are unable to attend this meeting in person but can participate in question time by submitting their questions in writing either online through council's website, by mail or hand delivered. A person can ask a maximum of 2 questions at any one meeting on any topic, and the questions and responses shall not exceed 5 minutes. Questions are to be received by 12 noon on the day of the meeting. Questions are read by the chairperson during public participation. The chairperson or councillor or council officer to whom a question is referred may immediately answer the question or take the question on notice for the next ordinary meeting. Members of the public Okay, I have a number of questions there. Here I've got 4 questions in total. And I'll start with one from Cheryl and Chris Johnson, and it's in relation to signage at the Beaufort dump point. We refer to the dump point in Beaufort. There's still have no signage there or no instructions as to the do's and don'ts. No reference to prohibited chemicals and foreign matter. How much water can you take, etc. What is the problem here, and when will we see this project completed with the correct signage, please? Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank Mr. and Mrs. Johnson for their question. I acknowledge also that Mr. and Mrs. Johnson do a lot of work in the community in promoting Beaufort in many ways, including through the local radio station and their active involvement with Business for Beaufort. Both have been very strong advocates for supporting council's actions to create Beaufort as a RV-friendly town. And it's pleasing to see that in the first instance, that the facilities that have been installed by council a couple of years ago have been receiving quite an amount of usage as they are. The majority of the facilities, the majority of the people that use the facilities are members of the CMCA and generally very well versed in the use of the facilities. But I do acknowledge that periodically there's some misuse potentially of the dump point, as Mr. Johnson and Mr. and Mrs. Johnson have pointed out, and council will install some appropriate signage to assist in reducing this misuse.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. I have a second question from Cheryl and Chris Johnson, and it relates to rubbish bins in the main street of Beaufort. Often the bins are pulled out of the enclosures and replaced with a clean bin, but the contractor doesn't pick up rubbish fallen into the enclosures. Clean bins are a reflection of the pride we show our residents and tourists to our town. Our question is, would council please build into the budget the regular maintenance and cleaning of the bins and enclosures throughout the year on a regular basis, please? I think that's for you, Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, for your question. I'm happy to put forward this request as a new initiative for the 2023 budget. I'm also happy to seek some short-term funds from within our existing budget to enable some additional cleaning of the bins and the enclosures. Council officers are also seeking to retrofit the bin surrounds to prevent or make it harder for rubbish to fall down between the bin and the enclosure. Again, I thank the Johnsons for their question and their concern for this for the amenity of our town.
Thank you, Mr. Gowns. And just a couple of things there. I do note that I did summarise those questions a bit. They were quite lengthy, but we still got the feel of what the actual question was. And I'd like to thank Chris and Cheryl for their questions and especially their continued passion they have for improving our town and maintaining a really pleasant streetscape and township in Beaufort. So thank you very much, Cheryl and Chris. The next question is from Trevor Davey of Beaufort. And the question is, how can Pyrenees Shire Council impact change in the Shire in a positive manner to deliver the message of things we need to do as Victorians and Pyrenees Shire residents to assist climate change damage in light of the global report? Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Davies, for your question. Pyrenees Shire Council takes climate change very seriously and sees its role as being a community leader in this field. The current council plan states that council will provide leadership by encouraging sustainability initiatives in partnership with others, which reduce council's environmental footprint or which enable businesses and the community to increase resilience and adapt to a low carbon economy. Over the last few years, council has been active in the climate change space with collaboration with the Central Victorian Greenhouse Alliance. CVGA is a network of 13 councils throughout Central Victoria who develop and implement innovative regional projects, undertake advocacy on climate and energy policy, share knowledge and promote best practice. Council has undertaken a number of projects recently that have reduced the impact of climate change on our business and the community as a whole. These projects not only make our operations more efficient by reducing costs, they are also effective in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Some of these projects, and I won't list all of them, include the Bioenergy project that we partnered with the Beaufort and Skipton Health Service, which converted an energy source from gas to sawmill waste. We've also been involved in the Solar Savers program, which targets low-income households to provide green energy inputs into their energy use. Council's also taken an active role in converting a lot of its buildings to having solar panels on them, including the Beaufort office, the Beaufort Resource Centre, Beaufort Pool and the Evoca Resource Centre. Council's also been involved in a residential streetlights program, which changed high-use energy lights to low-watt LEDs. We've been involved in projects such as the Future Landscapes, which is an impact of climate change on farming communities and the natural environment. We've also been involved in the Beaufort Recycled Water project, which looks to use recycled water to irrigate recreational facilities. And that's being implemented this year. We've also been involved with some Sustainability Victoria programs, including the local government Energy Saver program. This involved a detailed energy audit of 8 council buildings to understand where energy savings could be made to reduce council's costs as well as greenhouse gas emissions. These included upgrades to heating, cooling and ventilation of plant equipment to make them more energy efficient, upgrades to hot water and heating systems, building management systems, passive measures such as shading, insulation and double glazing, lighting retrofits and renewable energy installations. Council's also been involved in straw to energy projects at the Skipton Hospital, again partnering with the Beaufort and Skipton Health Service. We've also been looking at the feasibility of electric vehicle charging stations and looking to provide facilities into the future for electric vehicles. Council's also taken the initiative of undertaking all of its power use in a power purchase agreement, which means 100% of council's facilities now use reliable renewable energy to power our facilities. This was implemented in July this year. We've also had another street lighting project, a stage 2 one, where we've partnered with Vic Roads to change joint street lights over to low watt LEDs. And we've also been most recently involved in the More Australian Solar Homes, the MASH program, which is a community bulk buy of solar and batteries. And council's also been in the space of facilitating wind farm planning and development. There are many other programs that we've been involved in, but it's fair to say that council has a very active role in the climate change and mitigation space.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. There's a second question from Trevor Davey. Does council have a plan to expand the environmental portfolio within Pyrenees Shire Council to include items that matter, such as emissions from local business and council vehicles, improved waste management, rabbit eradication, green waste controls, less removal of trees when doing works by planning to keep them, vital weed management, especially around drains and culverts, and signage? Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Davies, for your subsequent question. Council has been monitoring its fleet by the intake of fuel, and this has steadily been reducing over time. Just as an example, back in 2012-13, we were using 251,000 litres of fuel, which equates to 642,000 tonnes of carbon. In 2018 and 19, we've reduced that down to 150,000 litres, which is a very good reduction in the order of 40%. And that figure has been decreasing year on year. Other initiatives that council's been involved in is in native vegetation, being closely monitored under our planning scheme. And there have been a number of breaches that have incurred penalties. Council has been improving its tree canopy by planting additional street trees. And council's also been involved in establishing seed orchards for the forgotten woodlands that previously existed across the Victorian volcanic plains. In the weeds and pests area that Mr. Davies mentioned, council's been undertaking weed and pest eradication program annually in conjunction with the state government. This has been an ongoing program, thankfully, with funding from the state government. And this has targeted species like gorse, broom and blackberries, which are very persistent and require continued follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans, and thank you, Mr. Davey, for your questions. And certainly Mr. Davey is attuned to ensuring that we protect our environment, which is very, very pleasing. That takes us to items 10, items for noting. Councillors, you've had an opportunity to read through those items for noting, and would anyone like to comment on any of those items, speak on any of those items? No, have a move. Oh, you want to speak? Yeah, Councillor Vance.
I move that they be noted.
Yep, move them. We've got a seconder there, thanks. Thank you, Councillor Eason. Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just like to reflect on the Victorian native forest industry phase-out performance audit at our recent Timber Towns meeting. It was decided that we would go to the appropriate authorities, asking that the Victorian Auditor General take out a decision to ask the government to justify the information that they'd used to phase out the forestry industry by 2030. It's going to have a major effect on the availability of decent timber, I believe, in Victoria, on the building industry, and also the thousands of jobs that are going to be lost. There wasn't a lot of thought put into it, I believe, and the Timber Towns group certainly believed that it should be justified some more information released on the decision and how it was made. Thank you.
Councillor Eason. wish to speak on anything? Any councillors wish to speak on those other items? Certainly agree. I think the timber, in relation to the timber-related industries, which is we've got some very close to us here, so it certainly has an effect on us. So, all those in favour? Thank you very much. That takes us to item 13.1, items for decision. Economic development and tourism. So 13.1.1 Kickstart Events Program. Councillor. Thank you. This you, Mr. Nolan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek council's endorsement of recommendations to support event organisations who have applied for assistance under the Kickstart Events program. Council was successful in securing $30,000 via a grant from the Victorian government under the Regional Recovery Fund, and these funds were approved to enable council to support community and business groups in the Pyrenees to plan and deliver small-scale events to stimulate community and economic activity under the Kickstart Events program. Council committed a further $5,000 in-kind support to assist the groups in the coordination of the program. As required by the fund, council developed a framework and gave public notice and invited applications for funds. The applications were invited on the basis that events could be run and undertaken and able to be acquitted with Regional Development Victoria by the 30th of April 2022. I'm pleased to advise councillors that the number of applications received has been quite strong, which is an indication of the level of coordination by the council team in engaging with event organisers to get applications together. There's a list of fantastic events that have been compiled into a table, and that's presented before you. And I also acknowledge the fact that council have had some discussion with this with Mr. Ray Davies, who has overseen the application process. And there is a recommendation before you, councillors, in respect of the evaluation of those applications, where the applications have been assessed against the criteria established. And the recommendations includes supporting a number of events, which include the Beaufort Progress Association to run the Beaufort Town Market for $5,000, Beaufort Walk Fest for $2,250, the Beaufort Golf and Bowls Club to run an event, Elvis on the Green, for $5,000, Tour de Trails for a Wild Baritmo event to the value of $5,000, the Beaufort Football and Netball Club to run the Beaufort Truck and Car Show fireworks in Beaufort for $5,000, the Avoca Arts and Gardens Inc. To run the celebration event in Avoca, either on the date that is planned or at another agreed date, to the tune of $5,000. The Beaufort Agricultural Society for the Summer Horse Show to the tune of $3,670. The second recommendation is that council supports the events. That the council support for the events is subject to the appropriate regulatory approvals being in place by the event organisers. Now, should one of the supported events not be able to proceed due to the COVID restrictions or any other reason, including potentially that planning and other regulatory approvals are not in place, then the assessment panel be authorised to distribute the unspent funds to any other appropriate event. Councillors, that's the recommendation before you, and I'd be pleased to recommend a number of other events be supported also on this list, but the amount that's recommended equates to the amount of funds available.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors have got a recommendation before us here. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Clark?
Mr Mayor, can I move an alternate? Just
Yes.
to allow us to deal with
Certainly.
councillor not being in the room.
Yes.
This is just to foreshadow, we'll move the other recommendation in a moment. This is effectively to allow councillor Care to rejoin us to just deal with
Yes,
the
correct.
individual grants. So I'm happy to move that.
Seconded. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Can we just please have councillor Keogh come back in? Thanks, councillor Keogh. So we've got the other recommendation before us there. Councillors, would you like to move that? Councillor Eason, second it. Councillor Vance, like to speak on that, Councillor Eason?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These are all very worthwhile projects. Unfortunately, there are other projects also worthwhile, but the amount of money has run out. We will do everything in our power to support various projects within the Shire, but in this particular bucket, she's run empty. So we'll recommend these and hopefully get the improvements we desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Councillor Vance, do you wish to speak? Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Clark?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of things I would like to say. I think when we look at these events, when I looked at them first, bloody mask. When I looked at them first, I thought, we are a bit focused towards the bottom end of the Shire, but as council officers have pointed out to us today in our briefing, is that you need to think about this as a single program within a broader range of sponsorship that we do. And council officers have talked obviously about what we're doing with the Pyrenees Wine Growers and Wine and Grape Growers Association in terms of supporting them. We've continued to support Pyrenees Unearthed. We continue to support the Evoker races and those types of things at the north end of the Shire. So certainly this is not a situation where it's just going to one end. It's actually in a bit of a bigger context, which is really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? I think it's just important to note that it's been highlighted that certainly there's many other worthwhile events and applications, but there's only so much money in the bucket to go around. But it's important to note that there's a rigorous scoring process that takes place in relation to the applications in deciding how those funds will be distributed so that it's fair and equitable for everybody. So all those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. Move on to item 13.1.2, COVID-19 business support. Mr. Nolan? Is that for you?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek council support to waiver fees associated with some regulatory approvals in support of business who have been impacted by COVID-19. The fees that normally apply for permits associated with footpath trading activity, registrations for class 1, 2 and 3 food businesses, health, hair, beauty businesses and accommodation operators, and also street trader, mobile and temporary registrations. So this is part of ordinary business activity. And in 2020-21 financial year, council resolved to waiver fees due to the fact that many of our businesses had been impacted by COVID-19, and this was a small way in which council could demonstrate its financial support to these businesses. Now, in 2021, the impacts of COVID-19 are continuing. Not only have there been lockdowns within regional Victoria, but in metropolitan Melbourne is currently locked down, and many of the visiting visitors to the region actually come from metropolitan Melbourne. So our businesses are impacted. Many of them are impacted by the lack of visitation to the region. The report does identify the level of activity from our businesses in respect of the numbers of each of the permit categories and the value of those permits. In total, should council support the recommendation, this would result in approximately $38,000 worth of fee waiving. So that's effectively the impact on council's budget should council support this recommendation. And having regard to the impact of COVID-19 on our businesses, the recommendation is that council approves the waiver of fees for small businesses for the 21-22 financial year as follows: the footpath trading activities, food registration, all classes, the aquatic facility, health, hair, beauty, accommodation, street trader registration, and that council reviews the fees applied to small businesses prior to the end of the current financial year.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. We have a recommendation there, councillors. Someone like to move it? Councillor Vance, seconded Councillor Keogh. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For those of us that are not in small business, it's probably a little hard to imagine just how much effect this pandemic is having on our businesses, but I'm certain that they are not doing it easy. And this is one way in which the council can show a little bit of faith in our people that support us in our everyday lives. And it gives me great pleasure. There's one thing that I would like to add for those that are watching tonight's event. If you're not had your jab, go and get it, because we're never going to get sick out of this situation if we don't follow with the protocols and stick with what has been suggested with the shutdowns. But we're getting sick of shutdowns, I'm sure, and a jab will resolve the issue.
Thank you. I'd just like to second that what Councillor Vance has said, and just that in any way we can support our local businesses, we certainly would like to make that move. So thank you, and thank you for the officers that have prepared this. Thank you.
Any other councillors wish to speak? I think it's really pleasing. It might seem like only 38,000, but it's what we can do to try and help out. And you know, in relation to lockdowns, certainly if Melbourne's locked down, essentially so are we out here, because we rely so heavily on the tourism and the passing trade. So anything that we can do to help out those businesses, because they are certainly suffering, we're pleased to do where we can. So it's a really great initiative. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to item 13.2.1, PA 21042, planning permit application, development of a domestic storage shed at 3 Willoughby Street, Beaufort. Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with information that is relevant to making a determination on a planning permit application for the development of a shed in association with an existing dwelling at 3 Willoughby Street, Beaufort. The proposed shed is a 7 by 13 metre shed, and the site is subject to the general residential zone and the floodway overlay. A permit is required to construct an outbuilding with a floor area exceeding 10 metres squared. This application was referred to the Glenelg Hopkins Catchment Management Authority, and the authority has recommended that a permit not be granted. And the reasons that they've provided include that the development does not comply with the Beaufort Local Floodplain Development Plan. The development is likely to increase the amount of flood damage to private or public assets. The development is likely to raise flood levels or flow velocities to the detriment of other properties. And the development is likely to increase the number of dwellings located in a floodway area. A 1% annual exceedance probability flood, or in the old definition, a 1 in 100 year flood, will cover the entire property up to a depth of approximately 0.58 of a metre, or 58 centimetres. The Beaufort Local Floodplain Development Plan is an incorporated document within the Pyrenees Planning Scheme and seeks to minimise significant risks to public safety posed by flooding events. The plan specifies a number of requirements for development. The plan requires that sheds or outbuildings with enclosed sides should be constructed with a floor level at least 150 millimetres above the 100-year ARI flood level, must be sited on the highest available ground, and must be aligned so that its longitudinal axis is parallel to the predicted direction of flood flow. The location of the proposed development is within an area that exceeds a flooding depth of 500 millimetres and is not the highest point on the lot. Further, the application development does not demonstrate a floor level of at least 150 millimetres above the 100-year flood level. Before deciding on an application, Council must consider the Beaufort Local Floodplain Development Plan and any comments of the relevant floodplain management authority. This is the assessing officer's recommendation that a permit not be granted.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Councillors, we have a recommendation before us here. Would someone like to recommend that? Councillor Easton.
Mr. Mayor, I have an alternative recommendation available to pass to all councillors, whereby we determine to grant a planning permit. If I can get a seconder.
Someone like to second that? Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a situation here in the town where someone who's been in the town for many, many, many years has developed his property legally and created a living space for his family, and now wants to upgrade his backyard a little with a larger shed. And I'm reliably informed that in the case of a flood of significant volume, what is being proposed is going to make minimal difference to the area concerned. Now, the man's done absolutely nothing wrong, and I believe we as a council should be providing these ratepayers the ability to improve on the land that they own and work with. We don't always do that. Sometimes we disagree, and we may disagree here tonight, but I believe in supporting this application and having a permit approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Councillor Vance.
Yes, in supporting the motion moved by Councillor Easton, I believe that the alteration to the size of the building is minimal, and with that in mind, in the case of a flood, it only makes sense that the difference will be minimal also. It's not like as if he's constructing a new building on a vacant site. He's replacing like with like, and it's just fractionally larger. And I'm quite happy to support the motion that's been moved.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is an interesting challenge for council in the kind of the sense of things, and this is a bit of a one by degrees. I'm speaking against the proposal in this stage. I actually don't think it is in council's best interest to actually grant a permit in this context, and I think absolutely the landholder, is a good and decent and upstanding citizen in this town. But unfortunately, he's in the wrong part of the catchment in that sense of things. And effectively what he has at the moment, he has a 6x6 garage that he's prepared to knock down, and he wants to put a 7x13 shed. And that doesn't sound hugely different, but it's nearly 3 times the size. So it goes from 36 square metres to 91 square metres. And will it affect a flood? And the reality is it will affect a flood by millimetres. Absolutely no doubt about it. And he's probably almost at the bottom of the catchment. So there's not that many people beyond him. But the challenge about this is that if he only affects it by millimetres and the next one only affects it by millimetres and the next one affects it by millimetres, eventually it gets to centimetres and it gets to more centimetres. So it's a bit about the principle for me in the sense of things at this point in time. Were he prepared to build a shed that actually wasn't effectively with solid walls, so i.e. the water could actually flow into it or flow through it, then I think that would be a quite reasonable outcome, and I would be quite keen to support that, but I unfortunately cannot support this at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Kerr, do you wish to speak about it? I think it's a couple of things I feel are important to note is that the applicant has worked with the planning department and made a number of self-initiated changes to the original application. That's my understanding. And he's agreed to remove other structures to ensure a single structure in return. So it's certainly not an easy decision because it is what it is, I guess. But so anyway, we have an alternative recommendation there. All those in favour? Those against? Thank you. That takes us to item 13.2.2, neighbourhood safer places. This is you, Mr. Gowans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is for council to note the outcome of neighbourhood safer places assessments for the coming 21-22 fire season. A municipal council must conduct an annual review of each designated neighbourhood safer place in its municipal district to determine if it is still suitable to be designated as a neighbourhood safer place. In conducting the review, council must ask the CFA, Country Fire Authority, to assess each neighbourhood safer place in accordance with CFA assessment guidelines. A neighbourhood safer place is a space that is a place of last resort for individuals to access and shelter in during a fire event affecting their neighbourhood, without the need to take a high-risk journey beyond their neighbourhood. It's also a space that eliminates direct exposure to flames from a fire front and management of radiant heat to survivable levels, and should only be accessed when personal bushfire survival plans cannot be implemented or have failed. A neighbourhood safer place does not guarantee the survival of those who assemble there. Council currently has 9 designated neighbourhood safer places. These include at Lexington at the Tollbar Park, Warborough at the Recreation Reserve, Beaufort at Wotherspoon Park, Snake Valley at St Bridges Church Reserve, Avoca at the Median Strip in High Street, Moonabel at the Recreation Reserve, Natty Alec at the Recreation Reserve, Redbank at the Recreation Reserve, and Landsborough at the Recreation Reserve. All locations were assessed by the CFA in July this year and were deemed to be compliant with the CFA assessment guidelines. Therefore, it's the officer recommendation that council notes the outcome of the Pyrenees Shire Council's Neighbourhood Safer Places assessment conducted by the Country Fire Authority and publishes the list of neighbourhood safer places on council's website.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Councillors have a recommendation there. Councillor Clark. Second to Councillor Kerr. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just speaking in support of the resolution, but just to ask Mr. Gowans a question, please. Raglan and Amphitheatre, Mr. Gowans, if you could give us an update if there's any news on those, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Clark. Amphitheatre definitely has been assessed a number of times and still has concerns with the, unfortunately, surrounding fire risks to the Recreation Reserve, which has been nominated as a potential spot for a a neighbourhood safer place, but unfortunately doesn't comply with the required offsets there. It's a similar situation in Raglan. However, I'll have to find out the details on the last Raglan assessment and whether there has been some changes there. But I know that the amphitheatre assessment has been undertaken more recently, but I will follow up on the Raglan assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Gowans, neighbourhood safer places, are they a legislated requirement? And if so, what are we doing about all the other localities within the Shire? If it's not a legislated requirement, then we don't worry about those other places. What's the outcome?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Eason, for your question. Neighbourhood safer places are at the discretion of council to nominate for localities. Assessment is undertaken by the Country Fire Authority. So council may have, and before my time at council, may have assessed a number of other neighbourhood safer places for other settlement areas. And my assumption would be that they didn't have compliance with the guidelines. So absolutely, it's council's discretion to nominate the localities that should be considered for a neighbourhood safer place. The legislation is there around the assessment, but it's not a requirement for all settlement areas to have a neighbourhood safer place.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Councillor Vance.
I'm going to throw two more into the ring, Mr. Gowans, that being Barclay and Crollands. It's an obvious that that'll be the staging point if there's a fire in the area, because both areas have fully qualified kitchens, and that's where people go, where the hall is, the local hall. And I know Barclay's requested on numerous occasions to be included. So if we can have a follow-up with them too, it would be appreciated.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councillor Vance, and more than happy to follow up on those locations.
Thank you. I just have one further question, Mr. Gowans. Sorry to push this on, but in relation to those areas that are not deemed suitable, can they get reassessed? And if they can, is there anything that we can do to mitigate any of the issues that might be not make them fail in the first assessment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there are treatments that can be undertaken. Normally, that treatment would require vegetation removal. So that would then be subject to the planning scheme requirements around vegetation removal. And obviously the planning guidelines have those three philosophies of avoid, minimise and offset. So there is a balancing act to be had where assessments are made and whether mitigations. Now, some mitigations can be quite small scale and certain sites, and I suspect that there's a number of sites that Pyrenees has that have had small amounts of mitigation activities to make them compliant. And one of those mitigation activities is about maintaining the fine fuel loads within the areas, and that's something that council commits a budget to each year to keep fine fuels at a lower level at those locations.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Any other questions from councillors? No. All those in favour? Thank you. That takes us to 13.2.3, waste collection services, Haigs Lane. Mr. Gowans, it's back to you, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with an update in relation to a petition from the residents of Haigs Lane, Snake Valley, relating to changes to the waste and recycling collection service. The letter that we received from the residents at Haigs Lane contained 7 signatures and requested that Haigs Lane, Snake Valley be excluded from the proposed waste collection service changes. Council is committed to provide a compulsory waste and recycling service to all residents within the Pyrenees Shire. The only consideration for exclusion of the waste and recycling service would be where it is impracticable for a waste vehicle to access properties. Council officers have inspected Haigs Lane and are of the view that access could be made practical with the removal of a small number of trees. Council officers have been working with the residents in relation to seeking residents' view on providing a common collection point at the intersection of Haigs Lane and Rowlers Road. 3 of the 4 property owners have provided feedback that they would be happy with a common collection point. However, the property owner at the furthest address does not agree to a common collection point due to the impracticability of the distance required to access the intersection. And it's the officer's recommendation that council provides a waste and recycling service for the residents of Haigs Lane at a common collection point. The council approves officers to use their discretion regarding the exclusion of residents where provision of the service is impracticable. And the council approves officers to review provision of access to excluded properties on an annual basis to assess whether provision of the universal roadside service can be provided.
Thank you, Mr. Gowns. As a recommendation to council, someone like Councillor Keogh. Seconded, Councillor Clark. Councillor Keogh, will you wish to speak on that?
I would, thank you. Just looking at this scenario in itself, it is our service is not an opt-out service. However, we do have a road, which is quite the condition of this road, which is more of a bush track than a road. Would the costs associated with making that access and the fact that there is significance of the fauna along this road and the cost of the tree removal, both monetary and environmentally, versus savings of time or impact on this road to create a service in this area, I think does lead to the option of this being a better option for these landowners in this situation. These are residents that I've worked on. They're not the 3 that are happy with the collection point. They're not trying to opt out or not to contribute to the funds, which makes this an equitable service. And I think that should be noted, that they are really trying to work but still protect their area there. So I do think this is a good recommendation for this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. Any other councillors wish to speak on those? Councillor Clark.
Just to ask Mr. Gowns a question, please. The resident who is the furthest distance from the intersection of Rowlers Road, how far approximately, please, Mr. Gowns?
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councillor Clark. I did have that information available to me, but I don't have it right at this point in time, but it's over 500 metres.
Yeah.
The couple at that location may have some physical issues about how they may be able to access any distance for a common collection point as well.
Fair enough. I recognise that. I mean, our driveway is 500 metres long, but I've got a 17-year-old that I've delegated the responsibility to, so I'm good.
Any other councillors wish to speak on that? No. All those in favour of the recommendation? Thank you. Takes us to 13.3.1, S11 instrument of appointment and authorisation. I think this is with you, Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to request Council's review and adoption of an updated instrument of appointment and authorisation. The S11 instrument of appointment and authorisation that gives delegation to authorised officers has been reviewed and updated in accordance with advice provided by Maddox lawyers. The review has accounted for a few changes. It's a change in legislation that altered the name of former Metropolitan Fire Brigades Act to the Fire Rescue Victoria Act, the inclusion of the Local Government Act 2020, inclusion of new mandated power positions through the Emergency Management Act, and a change in officer responsible for the Municipal Fire Prevention Officer. I should also note that we need to include an additional name against the Environmental Health Officer, which was inadvertently missed. A copy of the instrument of appointment and authorisation is provided for adoption by Council, and it is Council's normal practice to implement individual instruments which can be completed and authorised by the Chief Executive Officer under delegated authority provided by council in 2020. To this end then, therefore, the officer recommendation is that council, in the exercise of the powers conferred by the Local Government Act and other legislation referred to in the attached instrument, resolves that the members of council staff referred to in the S11 instrument of appointment and authorisation be appointed and authorised as detailed in the instrument, including the name of Mary Galea as Environmental Health Officer, which was the name that was missed off the instrument. The instrument comes into force immediately. The common seal of council is affixed to the instrument and remains in force until council determines to vary or revoke them, and council affixes the common seal to the instrument. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, you've got a recommendation there. Councillor Easton, seconded Councillor Clark. Councillor Easton, Councillor Clark. Any councillors wish to speak on that item? All those in favour? Thank you. That takes us to 13.4.1, the draft council plan. Mr Nolan, I think it's back to you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is for council to consider the draft council plan 2021-25 and to resolve to give public notice and invite submissions on the draft plan. The Local Government Act requires the council must prepare and adopt a council plan for a period of at least 4 years after a general election, in accordance with a deliberative engagement practice. And that plan must include how council will work towards implementing a 10-year community vision. As part of the deliberative engagement process to form the community vision and the draft council planner, a postcard questionnaire was mailed out to all the households in the Pyrenees Shire, asking residents to provide responses to 3 questions about their hopes for the Shire, what they love about their community, and what they would like to see changed about the community. 129 responses were received from people of a range of ages and from different places in the municipality. And this information was provided to support the development of a community vision. In the preparation of the community vision, council also invited expressions of interest from the community to form a community panel, which was established after a strong number of expressions of interest. The panel comprised approximately 25 community representatives, and an independent facilitator was engaged by council to work with that community panel over a series of workshops to prepare a 10-year vision for the Shire. That 10-year vision has been provided to council, and in recent weeks, council has been undertaking a process to prepare the new council plan for a 4-year term. The council plan that you have, or the draft council plan that you have, has 4 pillars of priority, and has been provided as an attachment to this report. It's also those pillars of people, place, environment, and economy are also supported by enabling principles in the plan, and those principles relate to the motivation and inspiring of community involvement through ongoing engagement, providing transparency and accountability, and the use of resources efficiently and effectively. The draft council plan has been prepared in a way that ensures council's statutory requirements of the Act are met, while responding to the community vision and the strategic direction of the council for the 4-year period. It's having workshopped this council plan, and as late as this afternoon, there were a number of changes that council was looking to implement in respect of some elements of the plan. But now the plan is in draft, and subject to any final amendments that council may be happy with, that it's now recommended that the plan be ready to placed on exhibition. And in accordance with our council's community engagement policy, that council gives notice to the community and invites submissions. It's also intended and recommended that the community panel that was formed also be invited to respond to the council plan. So in conclusion, councillors, I'd like to commend the plan to you and commend you for the work that you've done in preparing the plan. And the recommendation before you is that council endorses the draft council plan 2021 to 2025, 4-year plan, that it be released for public exhibition, subject to any amendments. That council gives public notice of the draft council plan 21 to 25 in accordance with the Local Government Act and council's community engagement policy, inviting submissions. The council meets after the submissions close to hear and consider any submissions received on the proposed council plan, and that at the ordinary council meeting on the 21st of September, council resolves to adopt the plan on that date with or without amendments. And I'll place those recommendations before the council.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillor's got a recommendation there. Councillor Eason, the seconded. Councillor Keogh. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council plan is a document for the 4 years of our tenure after the last election. It's a document that I've been through and done on a couple of occasions previously, being fortunate enough to be on council. It was interesting this time to have more community input than just the councillors and staff around the table. That group of community that were put together through quite a rigorous sorting process, not run by councillors, was very interesting to watch. These people from various sections of our shire, various age groups, various demographics, got together, answered a lot of questions, worked together, came up with their own answers and passed them on to the councillors. We've included those deliberations within this council plan, and we commend it to the community to have a look at, because this is your plan through us for the next 4 years. I invite you, I implore you to take a look at it, to come back and tell us if you don't like something about it, because there's an awful lot of people in our community that have put some very hard work into creating this document for you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? Councillor Keogh.
Thank you. Just to endorse that, and again to thank everyone for the effort and the community that have really put such a lot of voluntary effort into this, so that we can really hear what needs to go into this plan and be really interactive and transparent and moving forward to best meet the needs of everyone in our community.
Any other councillors wish to speak on that? Thank you. I think it's important that I certainly agree with Councillor Eason and Councillor Keogh. If you've got some feedback you want to give us, please do it. And we really encourage that. The more feedback we get, the better we can, if we need to, make amendments to those plans if required and make them fit more to what the community wants and expects. So it's really, really important. If you see something you think, please let us know, and please give us that feedback. We really invite that. Councillors, all those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. That takes us to 13.4.2, Weybridge Building at Beaufort. Mr. Nolan, back to you, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is for council to consider a request from the Beaufort Skipton Health Service to facilitate the relocation of a Weybridge building in Havelock Street, Beaufort, and invite submissions from community members on a more suitable location. Of course, we're just talking about a small building here. We're not actually talking about a Weybridge. The existing building has been relocated to its current site from its original location. And the Beaufort Skipton Health Service have written to council and advised that the building is surplus to their needs, and the service has developed a master plan for the site, which doesn't include the Weybridge building. It does have some historical significance and certainly some historical interest by the community. And the report that's in front of you actually outlines some of that historical context. There are even photos there, thanks to Jane Bowker, who managed to source these and provide them for the report. And one photo actually shows the original location of the Weybridge building, and another photo shows the building in its existing location. There have been suggestions made about possible relocation to other sites, but given that there's a significant community interest in this, the recommendation is that council undertake an engagement process. So the recommendation is that council undertakes a community engagement process, seeking feedback from the community on an alternative site for the Weybridge building, and brings a further report to council on the matter when the community engagement process has been completed.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Recommendation, Councillor Kerr, Councillor Vance. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak on that?
Yeah, happy to support the recommendation, Mr. Chairman. It's an important little building to the wider community of Beaufort, and I'm quite comfortable with the people of Beaufort telling us where they suggest it should go. It's far be it for me to tell them where to put it, so I'm quite happy with the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Keogh.
Sorry, just having some troubles with the microphone. No, I think when we can protect our heritage in any way, and this is a great way to be able to do that, and hopefully we'll come up with a great spot to protect that. So it's a great thing.
Councillor Kerr. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? I do note that in that old photo that it was strategically placed near the hotel. So I'm assuming that was done so when you're waiting for your dockets, you could treat yourself to a little beverage across the road. But it looks like it's very much in the latest photo, very much intact how it was back in those days. So it's certainly probably been restored, granted, but it has stood the test of time, and I think it's important that we keep it that way. So it'll be good to see it go to a good home and a good location, and look forward to some of those suggestions from the community. All those in favour? Thank you. That takes us to item 14, councillor reports and general business. So if we go to councillor reports, we might start with councillor Keogh, please.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. You'll notice on my activity report, and I think I did speak to this at the last meeting, but I was able to catch up with the ladies that are running the Snake Valley op shop, and that was great while we were out of lockdown for them to be able to open and have some visitors there. And also last month we had a local lady, Tara Poole, have a wonderful art exhibition that was hosted in the Carnham church there, and it was Uniting Church, and it was just such a beautiful, very thought-provoking exhibition that Tara had put on there called Thrum. So linking historical and contemporary living in the area and connection to the area. Last month I was also able to participate online on the MAV Strategic Planning and Decision Making Workshop, which was very well run, and there were a number of councillors from across the Victoria that were able to participate in that and share ideas, which is always wonderful as a councillor to be able to learn from others and contribute. And I think we've become a lot stronger in all of our municipalities because of that. Last week, I was able to, I had the great joy of attending the Country Women's Association meeting, the first one they had been able to have at Beaufort since lockdown had prevented it. They did have a fantastic professor, Ian Clark, who is now a retired professor, but he's worked for a number of years in a number of roles, but particularly at Federation Uni, looking at the history of areas, geographical, historical significance, but particularly of names of places. And I know many of us are familiar with the Indigenous name of Wendouree actually meaning go away, and it's quite interesting, all the other names in our own area that have different cultural significance that we do not know. And it was, I won't go through them all, there are many, but very significant sites around our Pyrenees area that were beautiful connections to the areas and why they were called that, our mountain ranges and beautiful water spots and creeks and that. So it was just so interesting. It might be a wonderful thing to even have Professor Clark come and speak at other in other opportunities, but the ladies there were very interested in what he had to say. What was brilliant about being there and what was mentioned is that the women's associations that we have in our area, it's not only so important for their own social and emotional needs, but also the ladies coming together through that committee and through that association, that then filters to their family and the benefits then to their friends and the whole community around them. So it has been terrific. A new thing that has come out of the CWA across Australia are actually virtual associations that have now been set up. So Tasmania set one up last year and Victoria now has one. That was a key feature of the meeting too this year, being able to reach out to those very remote women to be able to still participate and have that support. So, a lot of these volunteer groups and groups getting together have had to be show that initiative to be able to keep meeting, and it's been wonderful. I was also, we had the MEMSI meeting last week too. There has been a number of new committee members changeovers, but a lot of it was, again, business as usual, making sure that we're prepared to protect our community where we need to and make sure we're in sync with all those things, and particularly the impacts that COVID's still having on members of, and particularly vulnerable members of our community. The only other group that I am looking forward to next Monday, the Beaufort Scouts are having a mini presentation evening, and they're a really hopeful sign for our youth in our area. Their numbers jumped from, I think it was about 12 or so up to about 28, if don't quote me on those numbers, but to jump in a time when a lot of kids haven't been able to get together is a really hopeful sign, I think, for volunteering and for our little community in Beaufort. And it's not just kids from Beaufort, but from the surrounding areas. We even have some of the Evoca group that had unfortunately had to shut down. They're now coming over and joining with this group. So very hopeful sign. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. Councillor Easton, vocal ward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not a lot going on at the moment with lockdowns and all those other excuses that we use when we haven't done much. But I've been keeping my eye on the Western Victorian transmission line after attending the meeting in Warburg with over 100 people. And it strikes me that at that meeting, most people wanted answers and couldn't get them. And probably those answers aren't available at the moment. But certainly AusNet's not doing themselves any great favours with their very poor communication to affected landowners. And I would recommend to AusNet, if they're listening, that they improve on that element of this project, because those landowners are very, very worried, and they're our ratepayers, and we're here to support those ratepayers to get answers wherever possible. Also, I attended the Natty Alley Rec Reserve AGM last night, and I'll publicly apologise for being late, but I got there. And they're a wonderful group of people. They love their Rec Reserve. They do everything they can to keep their community going and keep that Rec Reserve going for all areas of their community. And it was interesting to sit around with them and see how, as a group of people, they invest in younger members coming onto their committee to generate follow-on members. It's something that we've had in our newspapers, we've seen in our own communities. The number of organisations that have closed down because as people get to their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they eventually get tired. They haven't brought in any younger groups, and those organisations close down. And our communities are worse for it because those organisations do a wonderful job. But the step they missed was not bringing in younger people 20 years ago. So to our volunteer organisations, please make the effort. Please try and bring in some youth if you can, because they're the people that are going to continue your organisation and keep it going. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Councillor Vance, to Cameron Ward, please.
Like Councillor Easton, I've had a fairly quiet month also. Rural Councils Victoria, due to some changes of faces on our committee, have decided they're going to move their monthly meetings to the third Friday in the month now. So we've skipped the month of July, and they did have a meeting last Friday called up at short notice, and unfortunately I was busy in the shearing shed, so I was unable to partake, but it was with in relation to the border shutdowns and the effects it's having on border communities and with Workwise. And I believe there were 38 different mayors and CEOs and committee involved in that discussion. And if we're able to watch the post that comes out from rural councils at the end of each week, the results from that will be posted. I'm certain they'll be advocating to the governments, both state governments, to come up with some solutions here, because if nothing else, it must be having dramatic effects on the mental health of the people that are involved. You know, we're now in the sixth shutdown, and I said it earlier in the council meeting today, the only way out, I believe now, is for everybody to front up and have their vaccinations and see if we can't get on top of this jolly thing. We did have a presentation today from a constituent from, he said amphitheatre, but I would call him Glen Lofty actually, or Elmhurst. More Glen Lofty than Elmhurst, with regards to the direction of this new power line that's being advocated. And I'm aware that where the power line in the past has gone, and it hasn't been real close to anybody's home, but on this occasion, when they build a new power line to the north of the existing line, it's going to affect more than one household, I believe. And it's imperative that the likes of Wesley, who came and spoke to us today, make their point known to council so that we can advocate on their behalf, because I'm not saying we can turn things around, but the more noise it's made, the squeakier the wheel becomes, the chance it gets a bit of grease. And talking about a bit of grease, just a grizzle, but how far away are our solar lights before they are fixed? Mr. Gowans, fourth month, still nothing happening.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm aware that contractors have been engaged, and that there has been a number of assessments of them. Unfortunately, there was some issues with the ability for them to hold any power for any length of time. So we're waiting on some componentry for them.
Thank you. And just to finish up yesterday, as was said earlier in the meeting, at an earlier motion, we had a shop inspection in Landsborough yesterday. And it is my hope and firm belief that council are going to be able to work closely with the current owner and see if we can't speed things up to get some action with opening up a general store in Landsborough and getting our community back on track. Save on fuel costs, if nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Clark, Ursula Dean-Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Had a number of commitments, of course, with my MAV role. Been doing some work on the early years space, and interestingly, got involved the other day in a discussion about the boundaries between Fire Rescue Victoria and CFA, which doesn't affect us, but certainly affects that metropolitan ring around Melbourne and even places like Ballarat in the sense of those type of things. I've also had the chance to visit a number of councils. I was at Frankston and Morning Peninsula early in July, and for those of us who know now we can't travel interstate, apparently Frankston is going to be the new Gold Coast of Victoria. There's a couple of bit of high-rise development planned down there, so we may need to be booking ourselves down to Frankston in the coming months and weeks. So I also had the chance to visit the Shepparton, Mansfield and Benalla councils, and interestingly, Benalla is not a council that normally features on our register, but it's actually probably the closest council to us in the state. It's about similar population. It's predominantly rural with a major town, and the major town's only 300,500 people. And it's 2 hours from Melbourne, has a significant tourist component to it. We often look out to our West Rimers and our Bull Oaks, and some of those ones are similar scale ones, but it was a really great discussion. I managed to get out of there after an hour and a half of pretty much flat out discussion with the mayor and one of their other councillors. But yeah, really useful, I think, discussion and a council potentially that we can probably learn a bit from, and vice versa in that sense of things. In terms of CVGO, where I represent council as the treasurer, we've got another meeting this week, and it's been progressing well. A lot of projects this year. With all the other councillors, I visited a variety of projects in Avoca recently that council have completed, which was really good to see. And I was also lucky enough to represent council at the top tourism town award in Bendigo a few weeks ago. And that was a great night. Really good to see a few of the Beaufort locals and the Avoca locals there. Unfortunately, we didn't win, but I think we can take credit because I'm pretty sure we were the only municipality there that had 2 towns in the final out of the 16 in the small town category. But certainly the bar's pretty high, but that's something always to aspire to in that sense of things. The fact that I was there, I'd like to thank my fellow councillors for going to a meeting in my patch in Warburg about the power lines in that sense of things. And as we can see from both from those discussions and the presentation we've had today from the affected landholder, there's still a fair bit of work for us to do at council in that sense of things, and I think through any means that we have possible. I'm also in my MAV role. I'll be meeting with Emma Germano, the president of the VFF, who spoke to us during our budget deliberations earlier on. I'm meeting with her tomorrow and looking forward to that to pursue a few issues, both about rating, but also about rural infrastructure, things like Murray Basin Rail and those kind of things that are really critical for our futures. And finally, Mr. Mayor, I had a great phone conversation yesterday with Triana Herbertson. Now, none of you will know Triana Herbertson, but Triana is Fran Herbertson's daughter. And of course, Fran is a long-term employee of the council. In memory of her mother, and she was hoping to do this last year, but COVID beat her, she's roller skating around Ballarat for 3 days and then roller skating to Lexington in November. And at some stage, Mr. CEO, she will need our approval to go to Vic Roads to get approval to skate out on the Sunraysia Highway. So if any of you have got skates, or even she said you can come along on a push bike if you want to as well, in November, I'll fill you in a bit more close to the time. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I think if I got my skates out, I might have to test the actual weighbridge out because they might be weight limited. But anyway, so certainly from years ago, I've put on a couple of pounds. Been reasonably quiet again for myself. Few things happening. We had a tour of Avoca and some of the sites there. You know, the Western Victorian Transmission Network project's a constant theme for us. And I'd like to endorse Councillor Easton's comments earlier regarding, you know, the better community communication and information flow to the community by AusNet. It's just important. And, you know, of course, what happens with in the absence of that, people become suspicious and they become very, very anxious, especially those people who will be directly affected. So it's not just about getting the information out, it's for people's benefit and their welfare and their well-being, because, you know, they do become very, very anxious. And the constant theme through our engagement with the affected communities and individuals is the consultation from AusNet to the community needs to significantly improve. So I think we've touched on that a number of times. I had the pleasure of speaking with the Western Bulldogs Youth Leadership Program, spoke about leadership, and I also heard some of the participants detail their projects to me and that they've undertaken, and it was really pleasing. I think it's a fantastic program, and what I've really was impressed with is that every one of those youths that presented their project to me, the project was about helping others. So I think that's a really important theme, and I think it just shows the value of that program such as that. So they're thinking about others and how they can help others and help the community, which I think is just such a fantastic thing. I also had a meeting at Landsborough yesterday, and I think it's important we do, our sort of theme is we do try and get out and visit those places, because the visual aspect of visiting some of those things that we're discussing and making decisions on is really important, and certainly at times can influence how we make that decision, because, you know, to see it in reality instead of virtually or a plan is really important. And of course, equally as important is to hear from the people that directly affects, because and be able to do that face to face is so important, and it's something that we certainly encourage here as councillors. And thank you to David for heading over to Bendigo for me for the Top Towns Tourism Award. I couldn't make it on that night, so thank you, David. I actually went to Warburg because I could make it to there, but I thank you for that, and I think it is important to note and really acknowledge that we did have 2 towns from our municipality that made the finals, which is a significant achievement. And, you know, we're competing with some towns that, you know, have significant advantages over us, such as they're a coastal town with high tourism and all those things. So, you know, they're always going to be in favour, but for us to have 2 towns in the finals is just absolutely significant. And I think the other thing I just would like to finish off on is I think we're seeing the benefit of having David on the MAV board, and you do get around a lot and see a lot of those unknown places, Benalla, for example. So I think we certainly get a lot of value out of that and what you can bring back to us, and the information that you can share with us as a council, I think is really important, and it certainly helps us, and plus it builds those relationships, and which is fantastic. So that's about it for me. And that takes us to the confidential items. So could I get someone to please, Councillor Easton, Councillor Clark. So we'll move into the closed section of the meeting.